Crota! In the early 90s, two gaming companies would dominate the 16-bit era in a now legendary period called the Bit Wars. Nintendo, having almost universally dominated the previous console generation with the NES, was gearing up for its follow-up system, the Super Nintendo. However, Nintendo's reign at the top would be threatened when, in 1989, Sega released the Mega Drive, beating Nintendo to the punch of their release of the Super Nintendo and aggressively marketing the Genesis as the cooler console. Sega's boost in the video game market would also be greatly increased by the first game of their new mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sega would go on to dominate the North American market in the early 90s with a slew of killer titles, many of which not only defined what made the Genesis great, but the 16-bit era as a whole. A second model of the Genesis and two add-ons would be released during the Genesis' lifespan as well, including the Sega CD and the 32X, leveling up the console's graphical capabilities and turning the Genesis into some kind of 32-bit Frankenstein. Although Sega's success would be short-lived and ultimately the company would be forced out of the console market entirely, the Sega Genesis library remains a crowning achievement of the 16-bit era. In this video, let's take a blast to the past and check out what the most radical games for the Sega Genesis are. Number 20, Beyond Oasis. A really fun and addictive action-adventure game that combines the best elements of top-down games like Zelda and Illusion of Gaia with platformer and beat-em-up elements, Beyond Oasis is a really unique title that is so much fun to play. The player controls Prince Ali, no, not that one, and can utilize an array of abilities such as using the default weapon, a knife, as well as other collectibles like swords and bombs and magic items. There are also a variety of different moves that can be used by executing different button combinations to deal more powerful blows to enemies, as well as dashing and jumping. The sprite work and graphics are really nice too, and give off the same kind of high adventure vibes as other games of its ilk from the Super Nintendo. Truly a fun and addictive game. Number 19, Pulseman. Developed by Game Freak, yes, that Game Freak, and released in North America at the time exclusively via the Sega Channel, Pulseman is a heart-pounding platformer with flashy visuals, unique game mechanics, and, like a lot of the games Game Freak was developing during this time, charged up with electrifying personality. The game naturally stars Pulseman, a half-human, half-computer or sea life, with shocking abilities that utilize electricity, like the Lightning Dash, and in particular the Voltesser, being a really fun and unique mechanic that temporarily renders Pulseman invincible, turning him into a lightning orb and allowing him to fly through levels. The game visually looks stunning on the Genesis, with flashy animations and impressive-looking stages. Pulseman is a classic and one of the best platformers on the console. Number 18, Contra, Hardcore. Contra blasted onto the Genesis with Hardcore, one of the most challenging games in a series that is no stranger to difficulty. While yes, the difficulty can be a big turnoff for a lot of people, Contra Hardcore regardless has some of the most intense gameplay and is one of the most visually impressive games for the Genesis. It's the classic Contra run-and-gun formula turned up to 11 with kick-ass music, stunning visuals, and intense boss fights. There are even cutscenes and multiple branching paths, leading to different endings that the player can unlock. That is, if you can actually make it that far. Contra Hardcore is an excellent addition to the series, and one of the best run-and-gun games on a console loaded with some of the greatest games of this ilk. Number 17, Crusader of Centi. Considered by many as A Link to the Past of the Genesis, Crusader of Centi was an attempt by Sega to develop more RPGs for the Genesis to compete with Nintendo in Japan. Featuring the top-down action RPG gameplay of games like The Legend of Zelda and Secret of Mana, Crusader of Centi is an excellent game in its own right. The player uses a sword and shield and moves very similarly to Link. He even looks a little like Link. However, it combines these Zelda-like elements with some great original ideas, particularly the animal companions, which allow the player to utilize different abilities based on what animals are equipped. The game looks great on the Genesis, and combined with its fun and approachable gameplay, makes it an excellent action-adventure game. Number 16, Shinobi III, Return of the Ninja Master. The Shinobi series is one of the more iconic and successful on the Genesis. While, of course, Revenge of Shinobi is a stone-cold classic from the early period of the console's life, Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja Master, really perfects the formula with faster-paced gameplay, new moves, and stunning visuals. New abilities include wall kicking, a mid-air dash kick, and 4 ninjutsu techniques, flashy moves that can be used once per stage to execute more powerful attacks. The fast-paced gameplay, and particularly the boss battles, can really ramp up, and coupled with the stunning backgrounds and the upbeat music, makes Shinobi 3 one of the more high-octane and visually impressive platformers on the Genesis. Number 15. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Hyperstone Heist. The TMNT games are some of the very best beat-em-up games of the 90s, with games like Turtles 3 and Turtles in Time being staples of the genre. The Genesis would of course have to have its own TMNT beat-em-up, and rather than simply porting Turtles in Time, Konami would create a new title, albeit featuring many of the same elements of that game. Hyperstone Heist features fewer levels, but each level is much longer and more challenging. The game is also a bit more fast-paced, and of course features the core gameplay that makes the arcade-style TMNT games so addicting. The game also looks fantastic on the Genesis. While not quite as good as its Super Nintendo counterpart, Hyperstone Heist is a worthy alternative for Genesis owners who may have missed out on Turtles in Time. Number 14. Earthworm Jim. One of the more bizarre games of the 90s, Earthworm Jim 1 and 2 graced both the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, but made its debut on the Genesis. With its weird and wacky hero, it offers some really engaging platforming, unique levels featuring varied environments, and some very quirky gameplay mechanics. Earthworm Jim utilizes a blaster as the main weapon, as well as his own head and a variety of different moves. These are executed with some truly unique animations. Indeed, the whole art style of the game has a very animated look with loads of personality. While at times the mechanics can be as quirky as its hero, it's overall a fun platformer that embodies everything that was weird and wonderful about the 90s. Number 13. Golden Axe. Another of Sega's flagship franchises on the Genesis, the Golden Axe series is just another great example of the Genesis' stellar variety of beat-em-ups. Golden Axe's medieval flavor and excellent music make it stand out amongst other beat-em-ups on the Genesis, as well as being a fantastic early achievement for the console in its largely faithful port of the original arcade version. As far as the gameplay itself goes, it's fairly straightforward, with 3 different playable characters, all with different traits. In addition to attacking with the different characters' weapons and magic spells, there are also different creatures known as Bizarrians that the player can ride and attack enemies with. All 3 games are quite similar, although the first one is perhaps the most iconic. Either way, all 3 Golden Axe games are fun beat-em-ups, especially with a friend. Number 12. Ristar. Another stellar platformer with a unique art style and truly original mechanics. Ristar was, at one time, poised to be Sega's next Sonic the Hedgehog, although that sadly did not happen. Unlike Sonic, however, Ristar's gameplay is more slow-paced, with an emphasis more on exploration than speed. Aside from jumping, Ristar can only defeat enemies by grabbing and headbutting them, rendering him invincible for a short time. The grabbing technique is used in a variety of different creative ways, and the simple, approachable nature of the game is reminiscent of games like Kirby. Aside from the unique gameplay, Ristar's art style is incredibly detailed, making it one of the best-looking Genesis games. Everything from the layered backgrounds to the delightful use of color really makes the game pop, and the animations are smooth and very cartoon-like. Really one of the most underrated and entertaining games on the console. Number 11. Sonic the Hedgehog. In some ways, the very first Sonic the Hedgehog game is the most important game for the Sega Genesis, in not only helping to drive sales of the console, but in establishing Sega's most iconic character, the Blue Blur himself, Sonic. Inspired by platformers like Super Mario Bros., Sonic the Hedgehog took these basic mechanics and hit the fast-forward button, pushing the platforming genre into hyperspeed, all courtesy of blast processing, of course. Sonic is an addictive game that, from the onset, hooks the player with its colorful graphics, simple controls, and addictive gameplay. The music is really catchy too, and some of the tracks have become some of the most iconic tunes in all of gaming. Overall, the first Sonic the Hedgehog is a masterpiece that really defined the Sega Genesis, and far from the last Sonic title on this list. Number 10. Rocket Knight Adventures. Yet another excellent platformer for the Genesis, Rocket Knight Adventures impresses with its fast-paced and super addictive gameplay, delightful art style, and smooth-as-butter controls. You control Sparkster, a Rocket Knight whose main 2 weapons are a sword which can attack directly at short range, or by firing projectiles, and the rocket attack, which can be executed by holding down the A button and launching Sparkster in one of 8 directions. This attack is incredibly easy and entertaining to use to both attack enemies and shoot through the level and to assist with platforming. The player can also use Sparkster's tail to hang off of branches and other beams to climb through levels. The levels themselves are varied, and there are even a few that are more like rail shooters than platform levels. The game also looks great, and the character sprites, and in particular the funny expressions some of the enemies make, are really well done. Rocket Knight Adventures is a fantastic platformer that's a blast to play. Number 9. Ecco the Dolphin. One of the most incredibly unique and baffling games to be released on the Sega Genesis. Ecco the Dolphin is perhaps one of the strangest games on the console. It combines so many different elements such as its oceanic setting and very unlikely hero, Ecco, who is, yes, just a plain old run-of-the-mill dolphin, with time travel, science fiction, and at times dark and desolate tones. The music in particular can be quite eerie in its dark and dissonant ambience. This gives Ecco the Dolphin a very unique atmosphere and overall weird vibe mixed with some proto-Metroidvania style gameplay. As weird as it sounds, Ecco is almost the Super Metroid of the Sega Genesis. Ecco can dash and charge to attack, as well as use echolocation to interact with his environment. The game heavily emphasizes exploration, and many levels often lead to deep labyrinthian paths to save fellow dolphins or encounter bosses. The added challenge of continually having to find air for Ecco to breathe really ups the difficulty, and the game's reputation as one of the most difficult for the Sega Genesis is not to be taken lightly. Although not exactly the most approachable game, its compelling strangeness and unparalleled atmosphere make it a must-play on the Genesis. Number 8. Thunder Force 4. The Thunder Force games are some of the very best rail shooters of the entire 16-bit era. While all 3 Genesis games are excellent, Thunder Force 4, or as it is known in North America, Lightning Force Quest for the Dark Star, perfects the formula established by its predecessors with its fast-as-lightning gameplay, flashy weapons and power-ups, and some of the most badass graphics on the Sega Genesis. I mean, just look at it! The environments are huge and stunning, with awesome-looking backgrounds and insanely epic levels of detail. The gameplay can get really intense, particularly the boss fights, which include some truly over-the-top and epic-looking sprite work. There are an array of power-ups that the player can collect, which can really up the intensity, particularly the powerful Thunder Sword attack, which can deal heavy damage. The intense music and sound effects just adds to the high-octane gameplay, making it an electrifying rail shooter that is unmatched on the Genesis. Number 7. Alien Soldier. While unfortunately only being available at the time via the Sega Channel in North America, Alien Soldier is nevertheless one of the very best games on the console, and one of the greatest run-and-gun games of all time. The visuals and sprite work are spectacular, with a variety of enemies and bosses having some of the craziest designs of any game from this era. The backgrounds and environments are super colorful, flashy, and the action is just incredible. Essentially a giant boss run with plenty of chaotic shoot-everything-in-sight gameplay, it's more than satisfying blasting a bunch of insane-looking aliens into oblivion. There are 6 different weapons to choose from which are interchangeable during gameplay, as well as the ability to shield, hover in the air, and execute a badass move called the Phoenix Force, which lets the player dash across the screen to dodge, as well as unleash a powerful counterattack. Alien Soldier is a frantic, intense shooter that nearly perfects the run-and-gun formula. Number 6. Sonic & Knuckles. By the 4th game, the Sonic series had been firmly established as Sega's flagship franchise, really revolutionizing platformers with the first game and perfecting it with the second. Sonic & Knuckles was developed in tandem with Sonic 3, with the idea of being able to connect the 2 cartridges via lock-on technology, or essentially a cartridge slot on top of Sonic & Knuckles, which unlocks an arguably better game in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. While Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles are both incredibly similar in terms of gameplay, Sonic & Knuckles allows the player to choose between either Sonic or Knuckles, who play differently. Sonic is able to jump and run faster, while Knuckles can glide and climb walls. Sonic & Knuckles also unfortunately removed multiplayer as well, although it's available in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. That said, all the things that make great Sonic games are here. Gorgeous looking graphics, great level design, and fast-paced platforming action. An awesome Sonic game. Number 5. Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Sonic 3 slightly edges out Sonic & Knuckles to take the number 5 spot on this list. Although as previously stated, both games are incredibly similar and can be combined into a single game. As standalone games, however, I'd say Sonic 3 edges out Knuckles by a hair, with the multiplayer feature, ability to play as Sonic and Tails, and slightly better music and level design. The game also has a save feature, which is a nice little quality of life improvement. Again, that core Sonic formula is there, and some of the levels are some of the best in the series, like Hydro City Zone and Carnival Night Zone. The music is really good, with some of it even allegedly composed by Michael Jackson, who is uncredited. Both Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles are amazing platformers for the Genesis, and combining the two cartridges into one created perhaps the ultimate Sonic the Hedgehog experience. Harnessed with the power of blast processing too, of course. Number 4, Gunstar Heroes. Developed by Treasure as their very first title for the Genesis, Gunstar Heroes is a phenomenal platformer / run and gun game that really perfects the genre on a system where great run and gun games are all over the place. All of the best parts of your favorite run and gun games are here. Multiple weapons to choose from, seemingly endless blasting away at enemies through really fun and interesting stages, and of course, the high-octane blood-pumping action that these games tend to evoke. However, Gunstar Heroes really is a step above its contemporaries by having both excellent level design and really approachable gameplay and difficulty. Unlike games like Contra, whose one-hit kills make it incredibly challenging, Gunstar Heroes features both a life bar and unlimited continues. And while yes, the stages and particularly the different bosses can be challenging, the difficulty is really well balanced, and there's a lot of great detail in the level design, allowing the player to utilize the various abilities in fun and unique ways, and there's even multiplayer. The music and graphics are really excellent too, and some of the enemy designs are just completely bonkers. Gunstar Heroes is an absolute must for the console, and unequivocally the greatest run and gun game on the Genesis. Number 3, Castlevania Bloodlines. Having established its reputation as one of the greatest platformer series mostly on Nintendo consoles, Konami's first and only Castlevania on the Sega Genesis is a unique entry in the series. Bloodlines is befitting of the style of other platformers on the Genesis, while maintaining that dark and creepy atmosphere that the series is most well known for. While not quite the masterpiece as its counterpart on the Super Nintendo, Super Castlevania IV, Bloodlines is regardless an excellent game that belongs in that higher echelon of the very best of the Castlevania franchise. Bloodlines was a really standout entry to the series as well. While the game of course retains those core Castlevania gameplay elements, whipping enemies, collecting items and upgrades, battling creepy looking bosses, and of course, that catchy haunting soundtrack, the game takes a different turn in its plot, which features not a Belmont as the main protagonist, but John Morris, a distant relative and relation to a character from the classic Bram Stoker novel, Dracula, and Eric Lacarde, whose girlfriend was turned into a vampire, and whom wields a spear. The player can choose either of these characters to play as, and while John Morris plays like the typical Belmont character by using a whip, Eric Lacarde's spear is utilized very differently, and he can perform a charged jump attack allowing him to reach higher platforms. This makes Bloodlines super replayable, as the game experience is different based on which character you choose. The game also has stunning visuals and features some of the best graphics on the Genesis. Overall, Bloodlines is a scary good platformer for the Genesis, and one of the very best Castlevania games. Number 2, Streets of Rage 1 and 2. The original Streets of Rage was an excellent early game for the Sega Genesis that really took the beat-em-up formula and ran with it with a unique story, setting, and 3 playable characters that all played differently. Very much the edgier version of games like Final Fight, Streets of Rage featured a dark urban setting that borders on cyberpunk at times, with the ability to pick up weapons like pipes and knives, and featuring enemies like these risque-looking lady cops with whips. Ooh. And even the ability to summon a police car that fires a rocket launcher at enemies. Pretty wicked. The game's final level was also unique, giving the player the option to either join the bad guys or fight the crime lord. When playing with a second player, depending on how each player answers the question, can result in you actually fighting your buddy in perhaps the ultimate act of betrayal in a game. No. Oops.
Now wait a minute.
What are you trying to do?
I mean,
weighing the options? Come on, man, let's do this.
he seems to have a pretty good setup going here. I mean, I will make this more dramatic.
And you're gonna say yes? After working as a team for so long, you part company. Now, a fight to the death. What? Are you kidding me? Can't we attack this f***ing guy?
No, I f***ed the whole flow.
How could you? The second game, Streets of Rage 2, takes all of the elements that made the first game so unique and addicting, and improved on nearly everything from the visuals and sprite work, to the excellent music, and even upping the playable characters from 3 to 4, with each character having a more unique playstyle. Streets of Rage 2 also gets bonus points for its excellent atmosphere. The third game is also really good, although perhaps a little bit derivative of the first 2 games. Either way, The entire Streets of Rage trilogy is awesome, and perhaps the best examples of classic beat-em-ups of this era. Number 1. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Number 1 had to be a Sonic game, right? While the first Sonic game was a groundbreaking release that propelled the Sega Genesis into the stratosphere, and its 2 other sequels upped the ante with better graphics, more playable characters, and really great level design, Sonic 2 is really the sweet spot for many reasons. It introduced several new elements that would become staples of future Sonic games, most significantly the spin dash, which allows Sonic to charge up into a ball and shoot through the level. The game also introduced Sonic's little buddy, Tails, as well as multiplayer, although to be fair, playing as Tails can be more than frustrating at times. Sonic 2's greatest strength is in its excellent stage design, featuring awesome and memorable levels like Emerald Hill Zone, Oil Ocean Zone, and the iconic Chemical Plant Zone. The music, especially for Chemical Plant, is the best in the series, featuring compositions by the first game's composer, Masato Nakamura. Sonic 2 also features Supersonic, which can be unlocked after retrieving all of the Chaos Emeralds from the bonus stages. An awesome feature that renders Sonic essentially invincible and makes him move at hyperspeed. Sonic 2 is the Sega Genesis masterpiece, a supersonic platforming extravaganza that more than deserves the top spot as the greatest Sega Genesis game. Thanks everybody for checking out this video, I really appreciate it. I've got some other countdown list type videos of other consoles, as well as lots of other video essays, documentaries, what have you, linked at the end here and on my channel. So if you enjoyed this video, I hope you check out my other stuff, and consider subscribing to my channel if you like what I do. Also, I would appreciate if you could check out our friendly neighborhood Discord if you want to get just a little bit deeper into what this channel is all about. I love the Sega Genesis, this was fun to do. My next countdown list of this nature will probably be the GameCube, so I hope you guys look forward to that. Till next time, peace everybody.